By the end of this video, you'll know the 10 harshest truths that Machiavelli discovered about power, loyalty, and human nature. Truths he paid dearly to learn, but that can save you from making the same devastating mistakes. Why did a man who dedicated 14 years of his life serving his country wake up in a cell being tortured as a traitor? Niccolò Machiavelli was the type of civil servant every government dreams of having. Hard-working, loyal, competent. As second chancellor of Florence, he organized diplomatic missions, strengthened alliances, and helped keep the Republic functioning. He woke up early, slept late, put public interest above his own. His colleagues respected him. Leaders trusted him. Machiavelli believed his dedication would be rewarded with security and recognition. After all, he had no enemies. He never betrayed anyone. He always kept his word. Then the Medici returned to power. In November 1512, the family that had been exiled from Florence returned with military force. They weren't interested in keeping officials from the old administration. It didn't matter how competent or loyal you were. If you served the Republic, you were an obstacle. Machiavelli was fired immediately. Banned from entering Florentine territory, his properties were confiscated. But that still wasn't the worst part. 3 months later, they discovered a conspiracy against the Medici. Machiavelli's name appeared on a list found with the conspirators. He didn't even know the plan existed, but that didn't matter. He was arrested, taken to the Bargello and subjected to the strappado, a torture where his hands were tied behind his back and he was suspended by a rope until his shoulders dislocated. For weeks he screamed his innocence, swore loyalty to the new rulers, begged for mercy. Nothing worked. It was at that moment, hanging by a rope in a dark cell, that Machiavelli understood his first cruel lesson. The loyalty you offer doesn't guarantee the loyalty you'll receive. In fact, your goodness can be used against you by people who never intended to reciprocate it. When he was finally released, Machiavelli was no longer the same man. The dedicated civil servant died in that prison. What emerged was someone who had understood something fundamental about power. It doesn't reward merit. It rewards those who know how to play it. But discovering that loyalty is a dangerous fantasy was just the first in a series of revelations that would forever change his view of what really drives human beings. The kindest people you know are also the most disrespected. Think about your co-workers. Who actually gets what they want? The guy who always helps everyone, or the one everyone is a little afraid to cross? Who never gets interrupted in meetings? Who gets their ideas heard? Machiavelli did this same mental exercise observing the leaders of his time. During his diplomatic missions, he met dozens of princes, dukes, and kings. Some were beloved by the people, others were feared, but only one type managed to hold power for long. They weren't the kind ones. Cesare Borgia, for example, was hated in Rome. His tactics were brutal, his alliances calculated, and he eliminated rivals without hesitation. But Machiavelli observed something disturbing. Borgia could do anything he wanted. His soldiers obeyed instantly. His enemies negotiated carefully. Even the Pope, who was his father, treated him with strategic respect. Meanwhile, virtuous leaders who tried to govern only through kindness were constantly betrayed, sabotaged, or simply ignored by their own subordinates. Here's the experiment Machiavelli never wrote, but would have loved to test. Imagine 2 bosses in the same company. The first always gives in during negotiations, never fires anyone, avoids conflicts, and tries to please everyone. The second is fair but inflexible, sets clear consequences and follows through without exception. Not cruel, but also not predictable. Which one do you think would be more respected? Which would have more productive employees? Which could implement important changes when necessary? The answer is uncomfortable, but Machiavelli discovered it's universal. Respect doesn't come from how much you give people, but from how much they know you can take from them if necessary. This doesn't mean being a tyrant. It means understanding that kindness without consequences is seen as weakness. That gentleness without limits is interpreted as insecurity. That whoever never says no ends up being treated as someone who doesn't have the right to say yes. This was the 4th rule Machiavelli learned. Respected power is power that can be withdrawn. The 5th, whoever is afraid to use their influence ends up losing it. And the 6th, perhaps the harshest, people constantly test how far they can push you. If you never push back, they assume you can't. But understanding the rules of power revealed to Machiavelli something even more disturbing about why people act this way. Why are leaders loved by the people often defeated by those who are feared? Machiavelli witnessed this dynamic most dramatically during his observation of 2 consecutive popes, Pius III and Julius II. The difference between them revealed one of the most counterintuitive lessons about leadership and human loyalty. Pius III, who ruled for only 26 days in 1503, was universally adored. A sincere religious man, generous with the poor, gentle with his subordinates. During his brief papacy, Machiavelli observed how cardinals, diplomats, and even Roman citizens spoke of him with genuine affection. Everyone wanted him to succeed, but when Pius III died suddenly, his death was forgotten within weeks. No faction fought to preserve his policies. No group tried to continue his legacy. His pontificate disappeared from history as if it had never existed. Julius II, who succeeded him, was the complete opposite. Known as Il Papa Terribile, he was explosive, unpredictable, and didn't hesitate to use military force to achieve his objectives. Machiavelli, who accompanied him on various diplomatic campaigns, recorded in letters that everyone trembled when Julius entered a room. No one dared openly contradict him. The result: Julius II transformed the papacy into a dominant political power. His decisions were implemented immediately. His enemies surrendered or were crushed. Even after his death in 1513, his reforms and conquests remained intact for decades. This direct observation led Machiavelli to the fifth rule, which he articulated masterfully in chapter 17 of The Prince. Love is held by bonds of obligation, which men being bad are broken whenever it serves their purpose, but fear is held by dread of punishment which never abandons you. The logic is brutal but irrefutable. Love is a feeling that depends on mood, circumstances, and people's momentary interests. Fear is a rational assessment of consequences that remains constant regardless of feelings. Machiavelli saw this working at all levels of relationships. During his diplomatic missions, he observed that alliances based on affection were constantly betrayed when better opportunities arose. But alliances based on mutual respect and capacity for retaliation lasted decades. This doesn't mean you should be hated. It means understanding that respect based on capacity for action is more reliable than affection based on benefits granted. Think about that boss everyone loves because he never enforces deadlines, forgives all mistakes, and tries to be friends with everyone. At the first pressure from management, the same employees who praised him will throw him under the bus to save their own skin. Compare that with the boss who is fair but firm, who recognizes good work but also punishes incompetence, who maintains professional distance but is predictable in his decisions. When he faces problems, his team defends him because they know he would defend them too. The difference lies in what Machiavelli identified as productive fear versus destructive love. Productive fear doesn't come from cruelty, but from predictability of consequences. People know exactly what to expect from you and respect that. Destructive love comes from trying to please everyone, which creates impossible expectations and inevitably disappointments. In his discourses on the first decade of Titus Livy, Machiavelli deepens this analysis studying the Roman Republic. He noted that the most effective consuls were those who balanced benefits with discipline, who rewarded loyalty but punished betrayal exemplarily. This historical observation led him to an even deeper discovery. People value more what they paid a price for. When you make someone's life too easy, that person loses the sense of value of what they receive. When there's some cost, emotional, social, or material, the perceived value increases exponentially. That's why that person you always help without asking for anything in return is the first to criticize you when you make a mistake. It's not necessarily ingratitude. It's psychological relief. Finally, they found a justification for not feeling constantly indebted to you. Machiavelli documented this pattern observing relationships between patrons and protégés in Italian courts. Protégés who received favors too easily often became resentful of their benefactors. Those who needed to earn each benefit remained loyal much longer. The practical lesson is disturbing. If you want to be valued, you can't always be available. If you want to be respected, your approvals must have weight. If you want lasting loyalty, people need to know they can lose it. This applies to romantic relationships, friendships, family dynamics, and professional environments. The person who always gives in, always forgives, is always available ends up being seen as guaranteed, and what is guaranteed loses emotional value. But understanding this dynamic of fear and love revealed to Machiavelli something even more disturbing about the impulses that truly govern human behavior. Why do people who swear they love you become the first to abandon you when you need them most? This question tormented Machiavelli during his years of exile in Sant'Andrea between 1513 and 1520. Away from political intrigue, he had time to dissect every betrayal he had witnessed, and he made a discovery that shocked him. People don't act for the motives they publicly declare. In a famous letter to Francesco Guicciardini from 1526, Machiavelli wrote, "I believe that as nature made men with different faces, so it also made them with different minds, but each governs himself according to his mind and his fantasy." This apparently simple observation contained a brutal truth he had discovered studying human behavior for 2 decades. During his diplomatic missions, Machiavelli had observed a disturbing pattern. The same people who made eloquent speeches about honor, loyalty, and moral principles were the first to abandon these values when their personal interests were threatened. At the French court, he saw nobles who swore eternal fidelity to the king conspire against him in secret meetings. In Rome, he witnessed cardinals who preached Christian humility fight fiercely for power and riches. In Florence, he met merchants who defended republican values but supported any government that protected their business. The 6th rule that emerged from this observation is psychologically devastating. People act out of self-interest, even when they sincerely believe they're acting out of love, friendship, or principles. How does this work in practice? The mechanism is subtle but universal. We constantly redefine our interests to coincide with our emotional impulses. That friend who abandons you in difficulty doesn't do it because he stopped liking you. He does it because associating with you became dangerous for his image. And then his mind creates a narrative that justifies the abandonment as prudence or responsibility to his own family. Machiavelli documented this process, studying the political alliances of the time. In chapter 28 of The Prince, he analyzes how Ferdinand of Aragon managed to maintain power for decades. He has always done and ordered great things, which have kept the minds of his subjects suspended and admiring, and occupied with their outcome. Ferdinand's genius was understanding that people need moral justifications for their material interests. When he invaded a territory, he always found a noble reason: defend Christianity, protect widows and orphans, combat injustice. His subjects supported the wars not despite their interests, but because Ferdinand gave them narratives that transformed greed into virtue. This dynamic explains why that person you always helped is the first to criticize you when you make a mistake. It's not necessarily conscious ingratitude, it's psychological relief. Finally, they found a moral justification for not feeling constantly indebted to you. The 7th rule Machiavelli extracted from this observation is even more disturbing. The more you make someone's life easier, the more that person resents you. Why? Because your constant generosity reminds them of their own weakness and dependence. During his studies of Roman history in the Discourses, Machiavelli analyzed how Julius Caesar lost popular support precisely when he was at the height of his generosity. Caesar distributed lands, forgave debts, offered Roman citizenship to conquered peoples. The result? A conspiracy formed by senators who directly benefited from his clemency. The psychological mechanism is cruel but predictable. Gratitude is an emotional burden that people carry only as long as they need you. The moment your help becomes unnecessary or inconvenient, that burden transforms into resentment. This explains dynamics you see every day. That employee you helped get promoted, but who now acts as if your advice is irrelevant. That person you supported during a difficult phase, but who avoids your company now that they're doing well. That family member you supported financially, but who now treats you coldly. They're not necessarily bad people. They're simply following a pattern of human behavior that Machiavelli identified 500 years ago. We hate being reminded of our vulnerability. In his observations about Cesare Borgia, recorded in the Legazioni, Machiavelli noticed something fascinating. Borgia never offered free favors. He always demanded something in return, even if symbolic. This wasn't cruelty, it was applied psychology. When people paid for the benefits they received, they valued them more and resented the benefactor less. The practical application of this discovery is revolutionary. If you want to help someone sustainably, always demand something in return. It could be public recognition, it could be a future favor. It could simply be that the person admits they need your help. The important thing is that there's an emotional or social cost, however small. But understanding these patterns of human nature led Machiavelli to an even more strategic discovery about how to navigate a world where appearances often matter more than realities. How can a man be simultaneously hated and admired for the same action? During his embassy to Emperor Maximilian in 1507-1508, Machiavelli witnessed a masterful demonstration of image manipulation that forever changed his understanding of reputation and power. The emperor had ordered the execution of a rebellious duke, but made sure the news reached European courts in 3 different ways. To allies, the execution was presented as necessary justice against a traitor. To enemies, as demonstration of imperial strength. To the people, as protection against local tyranny. The same action, 3 completely different narratives. And it worked perfectly. Machiavelli recorded in the letters he sent to Florence, "I saw how a wise prince can make a single action serve multiple purposes, depending on who tells the story." This observation led him to the 8th rule: reality matters less than the perception of reality. In chapter 58 of The Prince, Machiavelli articulates this discovery brutally. In the actions of all men, and especially of princes, where there is no court to appeal to, one looks to the end. Let a prince therefore win and maintain the state. The means will always be judged honorable and praised by all. The practical lesson is revolutionary. It's not enough to do the right thing. You need to control how that action is interpreted and communicated. Think about that colleague who got promoted. If he makes it clear he worked 12 hours a day for months, he'll be seen as dedicated. If he omits that effort and acts as if the promotion was obvious, he'll be seen as lucky or privileged. Same achievement, completely different perceptions. During his analysis of Cesare Borgia, recorded in detail in the Legazioni, Machiavelli was fascinated by how Borgia managed his reputation. When he needed to eliminate a rival, he always found a way to make the violence seem reluctant and justified. When he showed clemency, he always ensured it was interpreted as calculated generosity, not weakness. Most impressive was how Borgia controlled contradictory narratives about himself. To distant enemies, he cultivated the image of brutal and relentless. This kept them away. To close allies, he showed himself as calculating but trustworthy. This kept them loyal. To the people, he presented himself as protector against anarchy. This gave him legitimacy. The genius was understanding that different people need different versions of the truth to support you. Not lies, but emphases and contexts adapted to the interests and fears of each audience. This explains why some leaders can survive scandals that would destroy others. It's not about being more ethical, but about having superior control of the narrative. When a crisis emerges, they already have multiple versions of the story prepared for different audiences. Machiavelli saw this working in Florentine politics. Cosimo de' Medici, for example, was simultaneously seen as defender of the Republic by common citizens and protector of business by wealthy merchants. Same person, same agenda, but communicated in ways that resonated with the specific values of each group. The modern application is powerful. Your professional competence is worth less than your ability to communicate that competence to the right people. That employee who does mediocre work but knows how to sell himself gets more recognition than one who does excellent work but doesn't know how to communicate his value. In his reflections on Roman history in the Discourses, Machiavelli analyzed how Pompey lost to Julius Caesar, despite having superior resources. The difference was in narrative control. Caesar managed to be seen simultaneously as defender of the people in Rome and glorious conqueror among soldiers. Pompey never achieved a coherent image that motivated his supporters. This analysis led Machiavelli to a disturbing understanding. Most people prefer a convincing narrative to an inconvenient truth. They want reasons to support or criticize you that align with their own interests and prejudices. That's why it works better to say, "I got this opportunity because I prepared when others relaxed," than "I was lucky." The first version allows others to identify with your success or learn from it. The second makes them feel frustrated with their own lack of luck. Do you agree with this or think it's weak talk? I want to see your argument in the comments. But mastering the art of appearances revealed to Machiavelli an even more dangerous risk: the vulnerability of depending on a single source of power. If you have only one source of power, you have no power at all. Machiavelli learned this lesson in the most painful way possible. In a devastating letter to Francesco Vettori, written in 1513, he confessed, "I would not know how to live any other way than this, because I have long been accustomed to serving my homeland." This phrase sums up the tragedy of a man who concentrated all his identity, security, and influence in a single political structure. For 14 years as second chancellor, Machiavelli built a brilliant career, but made a fatal strategic error. He made his survival depend completely on the Florentine Republic. He didn't cultivate independent relationships with other powerful families. He didn't develop alternative sources of income. He didn't build a reputation that transcended his official position. When the Medici returned to power in 1512, Machiavelli brutally discovered that whoever controls your only source of power controls you completely. The ninth rule that emerged from his fall was crystal clear. Never allow your survival to depend on the goodwill of a single person or institution. During his later studies, recorded in the Discourses on the First Decade of Titus Livy, Machiavelli obsessively analyzed how lasting leaders always maintained multiple sources of influence. Cesare Borgia, for example, didn't depend only on his father, Pope Alexander VI. He had his own mercenary troops, independent alliances with other princes, diversified financial resources, and even secret connections with papal enemies. When Alexander VI died in 1503, Borgia didn't collapse immediately. He had time and resources to try to reposition himself politically. Although he eventually lost power, he survived for years after his father's death, something impossible if he were totally dependent on papal support. Compare this with Duke Valentino, whom Machiavelli also studied. All his forces, wealth, and alliances depended directly on his hereditary position. When he was deposed by a family conspiracy, he lost everything within days. He had no parallel power structures to cushion the fall. This dynamic isn't limited to medieval politics. It works in all aspects of modern life. That executive who builds his entire career in a single company will discover sooner or later that he's easily disposable. Even 20 years of dedication won't protect him if the company decides to restructure, or if he loses favor with a specific boss. But the professional who maintains a diversified network of contacts, develops transferable skills, and builds market reputation has options when crises arise. In relationships, that man who concentrates all his social identity in a single woman becomes vulnerable to any oscillation in her mood. If she decides to break up, he loses not just the girlfriend, but his main source of validation, social company, and even self-esteem. But whoever maintains solid friendships, independent hobbies, and personal projects has a life that continues functioning even during romantic turbulence. Financially, whoever depends on a single source of income, whether job, client, or investment, lives on a permanent tightrope. Any change in that source can result in total collapse. The Machiavellian strategy is always to diversify. Multiple income sources, skills in different areas, relationships in various circles. In The Prince, chapter 19, Machiavelli analyzes how principalities that depended on a single fortress were more vulnerable than those that had multiple defense points. The same logic applies to personal life. Your fortress shouldn't be a single relationship, position, or skill, but a diversified system of resources and connections. During his years of exile, Machiavelli applied this lesson methodically. He didn't just try to recover his political position, he began writing literary works, developed correspondence with intellectuals from other cities, studied military history, even tried commercial activities. He was building multiple identities to never again be completely dependent on a single power structure. The practical application is revolutionary. Examine all areas of your life and identify where you're vulnerable due to excessive dependence. Then, systematically start building alternatives. If your professional value depends totally on a specific skill, develop complementary competencies. If your social life revolves around a single group, cultivate relationships in other circles. If your self-esteem depends on recognition from a specific person, find other sources of validation. But understanding the need for diversification led Machiavelli to the most liberating and most solitary discovery of all. True freedom comes from never needing anything or anyone completely. In his final letters, written in his last years of life, Machiavelli demonstrated a serenity that contrasted completely with the despair of his first years of exile. In 1525, in correspondence with Francesco Guicciardini, he wrote, "I no longer fear fortune as before, because I learned that whoever has little to lose has little to fear." This transformation represents the evolution of a man who discovered the 10th and most powerful rule. Real independence doesn't come from having much, but from needing little. During his studies of ancient history recorded in the Discourses, Machiavelli analyzed how Roman Stoics managed to maintain dignity even under tyrants. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus all understood that true power is the ability to say no without fear of consequences. But Machiavelli went beyond Stoic philosophy. He understood that emotional independence needs to be accompanied by strategic independence. It's not enough to be indifferent to what others think if you still depend on them to survive. It's not enough to be stoic if you can be destroyed by withdrawal of external support. The genius of the Machiavellian approach lies in combining emotional detachment with practical preparation. During his final years, he systematically reduced his vulnerabilities, diversified income sources, cultivated relationships in multiple circles, developed transferable skills, created a reputation that transcended any specific position. In The Art of War, a work he wrote in 1519 to 1520, Machiavelli applies this philosophy to the military context. He argues that the best general isn't the one who wins all battles, but the one who never gets into a position where a single defeat can destroy him completely. Maximum victory is always maintaining a strategic exit. This logic applies to all aspects of modern life. In that relationship where you feel you can't live without the person, you've already lost all your negotiating power. You accept any behavior, forgive any disrespect, because you're afraid of losing your only source of love and validation. The Machiavellian solution isn't to become cold, but to build a life so rich and diversified that no individual person has power to destroy you emotionally. At work, when you're desperate to keep your job, you accept abusive conditions, low salaries, and toxic bosses. But when you have real alternatives, whether other offers, a financial reserve, or skills valued in the market, you can negotiate as equals. Whoever has alternatives has dignity. Socially, when your self-esteem depends on approval from a specific group, you become hostage to that group's moods and whims. You constantly need to prove your worth, follow unwritten rules, avoid any behavior that might cause rejection. Machiavelli understood that social freedom comes from having multiple circles where you're valued. The deepest application of this rule is psychological. Stop deriving your identity from external roles. You're not just an employee, a boyfriend, a son, a member of a certain group. You're a complex individual with multiple facets, interests, and capabilities. When one of these roles is threatened or lost, the others continue sustaining you. During his final years, Machiavelli had become practically indestructible psychologically, not because he was insensitive, but because he had built a life structure where no individual loss could break his existential backbone. This was reflected even in his correspondence. He negotiated with powerful princes without subservience because he knew he had value independent of their goodwill. He criticized policies without fear of retaliation because he no longer depended on official positions for his identity or survival. The final lesson Machiavelli leaves us is simultaneously liberating and demanding. Build a life so structured on multiple bases that you can lose any individual piece without the whole collapsing. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or insensitive. It means becoming truly free to love, serve, and commit from a position of strength, not necessity. When you don't desperately need approval, you can offer genuine affection. When you don't depend completely on a job, you can give your best without submitting to abuse. When you have real alternatives, you can choose based on values, not fear. Is there a phrase that defines this video for you? Write it there. I want to read each one. These were the 10 lessons Machiavelli paid dearly to learn. Each one was extracted from pain, humiliation, and raw observation of how the world really works when social masks are removed. The 10 cruel rules. 1. The loyalty you offer never guarantees the loyalty you'll receive too. Never completely trust people who have power to destroy you. 3. Respect doesn't come from how much you give, but from how much you can take if necessary. People constantly test how far they can push you. Fear is more reliable than love for maintaining loyalty. People act out of self-interest, even when they believe in principle. 7. The more you make someone's life easier, the more they resent you. 8. Reality matters less than the perception of reality. 9. Never allow your survival to depend on a single source of power. 10. Real independence comes from never needing anything or anyone completely. Today you know these truths without needing to be betrayed, tortured, or exiled. Use this advantage wisely. Now you've seen how Machiavelli transformed pain into practical knowledge. Click on the video on screen and discover the specific strategies he developed to navigate a world of manipulation and betrayal without losing his humanity. These are techniques that worked for 500 years and are still valid today. Click now on the video on screen.